My husband was secretly married to another woman while married to me. They say that love can blind you, that in the warmth of companionship, the truth hides in the shadows. But I never imagined that the man I called husband, the man with whom I shared my deepest dreams, was living a double life, a life that shattered my heart and my world in ways I never saw coming. In a quiet village where everyone knows everyone, secrets don't stay buried for long. Yet, his deception was so deep, so well concealed, that when the truth surfaced, it left me gasping for air, my spirit crushed beneath the weight of betrayal. In the heart of rural Jamaica, nestled between rolling green hills and the gentle flow of the river, lay the small village of Rose Hill. A peaceful, close-knit community where the days were filled with the sound of children playing and the scent of fresh bread from Miss Enid's bakery. This was where I, Miriam, lived with my husband, George. Our marriage, 15 years strong, was built on trust, or so I believed. George was a fisherman, a man of the sea, who left early in the morning and returned at dusk, his face bronzed by the sun, his hands rough from his work. Every day, I would wait for him on our veranda, and he would greet me with a kiss that felt like home. But behind those familiar kisses and warm smiles, there lay a secret so dark, it would unravel my entire life. It started with whispers. Small, seemingly innocent remarks from the village women who spoke in hushed tones whenever I walked by. Their eyes lingered on me with pity, their conversations abruptly ending as I approached the market stalls. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was the usual village gossip. But then I noticed a shift in George. His absences grew longer, his excuses more elaborate. He claimed the fish were becoming scarce and that he had to travel further to catch them, but something in his voice felt wrong, strained, as though he was trying too hard to convince me. One afternoon, as I walked through the village, I overheard two women talking. I stopped when I heard George's name, and what I heard next froze me in place. "Did you hear? George has another wife over in Seaforth," one of them said, her voice low but clear enough for me to catch. "Miriam doesn't know a thing, poor woman." At that moment, the world around me seemed to stop. My heart pounded in my chest, disbelief flooding my veins. Another wife. I shook my head, refusing to believe it. George was my husband. We had shared years of love, dreams, and hardships. How could he be married to someone else? That night, as George returned from what he claimed was a long day at sea, I watched him closely, searching his face for the truth. I asked him, my voice trembling, "George, is there something you've been hiding from me?" His eyes flickered for a moment, and I saw a flash of fear before he composed himself. "What do you mean, Miriam? You're worrying too much." But my instincts told me something was wrong. Deep down, I knew. Determined to find the truth, I set out the next morning. I took a bus to Seaforth, a village about an hour away, where George often claimed he was fishing. The bus ride felt like an eternity, my heart pounding in rhythm with the wheels against the dirt road. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew I had to see it with my own eyes. When I arrived in Seaforth, I asked around, describing George to the locals. The village was smaller than Rose Hill, and it didn't take long for someone to point me toward a small house at the edge of the village. My heart raced as I approached the house, my legs trembling beneath me. I stood outside the door, unsure of whether I had the strength to go through with this. But I had to know. I knocked, and the door creaked open. There stood a young woman, no older than 25, her belly swollen with child. My breath caught in my throat. She looked at me with confusion, and then recognition dawned in her eyes. You're Miriam, aren't you?" she asked softly. I nodded, unable to speak. My world was unraveling before me. "I'm Denise," she said, her voice shaky. I didn't know. He told me he was single. "We've been married for 2 years now." Her words hit me like a blow to the chest. 2 years. For 2 years, George had been living this secret life, married to another woman while still married to me. The weight of the betrayal crushed me, and I could barely stand. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers, but all I could do was stare at her in disbelief. She was just as much a victim as I was, her eyes filled with the same pain and confusion that mirrored my own. George had lied to both of us, weaving a web of deceit so intricate, neither of us had seen the truth. When George returned home that evening, I was waiting for him on the veranda, my arms crossed, my heart pounding with rage and hurt. He looked at me with his usual smile, but when he saw the fire in my eyes, his expression faltered. "Miriam, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice cautious. I stood up, my hands trembling, and I let out the words that had been burning inside me all day. "I went to Seaforth, George. I met your other wife." The color drained from his face, and he stumbled back, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find the words. "Miriam, I can explain." But I wasn't interested in explanations. "For 2 years, George. 2 years you've been living this lie, betraying me, betraying her. How could you do this? How could you look me in the eyes every day, knowing what you were hiding?" He dropped to his knees, his face buried in his hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Miriam. I never wanted to hurt you. I was weak. Weak." I shouted, my voice breaking. "You destroyed everything we built, everything I thought we had. How am I supposed to forgive this?" George wept, pleading for my forgiveness, but all I could feel was the cold emptiness in my chest. The man I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had torn my heart apart, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be mended. The days that followed were the hardest of my life. The village buzzed with gossip, everyone knowing my shame before I even had the chance to fully process it. I shut myself away, unable to face the pitying looks, the whispers behind my back. George stayed, desperate to make amends, but his presence only deepened the wound. I thought of Denise often. She, too, had been deceived, her future bound to a man who had betrayed us both. I considered going to see her again, to speak as two women caught in the same storm, but what would I even say? Would we find solace in each other's company, or would it only deepen the pain? As the days turned into weeks, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could stay, try to rebuild what George had shattered, or I could leave, reclaiming my life and my dignity. The choice was mine, but it weighed heavily on my heart. I had loved George for so long, but love, I realized, was not enough to heal the wounds of betrayal. And so, I sit here, on the edge of my decision. The house is quiet, the air heavy with the weight of the past. George sleeps in the next room, unaware of the choice I must make. Do I leave him and walk into the unknown, or do I stay and try to forgive? My heart is torn, my soul aching for peace. What would you do if you were me? The night was thick with silence. Even the crickets seemed to have stopped their usual song, as if the weight of my turmoil had quieted the world around me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thoughts spinning like a storm inside my head. George was fast asleep beside me, his breath deep and even. It used to comfort me, that sound, knowing that he was close, that I wasn't alone. But now, it only reminded me of the lies that had been woven so tightly into the fabric of our lives. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't breathe in this house anymore. Quietly, I slipped out of bed and walked to the veranda. The night air was cool against my skin, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow across the village. Rosehill was peaceful at night, its small houses tucked away in the shadows, the river whispering in the distance. But inside me, there was no peace. Sitting there, I thought of Denise again. That young woman who had unknowingly become a part of my life, my heartache. I wondered how she was faring now, with her child soon to be born, carrying the weight of her own betrayal. Did she lie awake at night like I did, haunted by the same questions? Did she wonder, as I did, whether George had ever truly loved either of us, or if he had simply been a man incapable of being honest with his heart? The next morning, after tossing and turning through what little remained of the night, I made a decision. I had to see her. I had to face Denise, not as a rival or an enemy, but as another woman, another victim of George's deception. Maybe together, we could make sense of the wreckage he had left behind. Or maybe, I needed to confront her to finally understand the full truth of who George had become. I dressed carefully, my heart racing with both dread and determination. As I made my way to Seaforth once again, the sun was just rising, casting a warm golden hue over the fields. The journey felt both long and short, as if time itself couldn't decide whether to rush me toward my fate or delay the inevitable. When I reached Denise's small house, my hands trembled as I knocked on the door. It felt like knocking on the door of a new life, one I hadn't chosen but was now forced to face. A few moments later, she opened it. Her eyes, wide with surprise, met mine, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. There was an unspoken understanding between us, an unspoken bond created by shared pain. "Come in," she said softly, stepping aside to let me enter. The house was modest, much like my own, but the air felt different, heavy with anticipation. Denise moved slowly, her pregnancy making her steps cautious, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for her. She was carrying George's child, an innocent soul in the middle of this tangled mess. "Why are you here?" she asked, sitting down at the small kitchen table, her voice weary, as if she had been carrying this burden far longer than I had known. I sat across from her, my hands folded in my lap, trying to find the right words. "I needed to see you. I needed to talk to you, woman to woman. We are both living in the aftermath of George's lies, and I don't know what to do." She looked at me, her face softening, and for the first time, I saw the same pain I felt reflected in her eyes. "I didn't know about you, Miriam. I swear, I didn't know. If I had known he was married, I would never have." I nodded, believing her. How could I not? She was as much a victim of George's deceit as I was. "I know. And I don't blame you. But I need to understand, how did this happen? How did he manage to live two lives, to marry you while still married to me?" Denise sighed, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "He told me he was a widower. Said his first wife had died years ago. We met when he was out here fishing. He was kind, attentive, he made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. We got married quietly, just a few friends and family. I thought we had a future together." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. George had told her I was dead. My heart clenched with both anger and sadness. How deep did his lies go? What kind of man could create such a cruel story, burying me in the past while building a new life with someone else? Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them away. "He told you I was dead," I whispered, more to myself than to her. Denise nodded, her own eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry, Miriam. I didn't know." For a moment, we sat in silence, two women bound by a man's betrayal, our lives shattered in different ways by the same deceit. And then, slowly, the anger began to rise in me again, not just at George, but at the injustice of it all. How could one man cause so much pain? As I left Denise's house, I felt a strange mix of emotions, sorrow, anger, but also a sense of closure. I had seen the other side of George's lies, and it made me realize that I could no longer live in the shadow of his deception. My love for him, once so strong, had been tainted beyond repair. When I returned to Rose Hill, I found George waiting for me on the veranda, his face drawn with worry. He had noticed my absence and knew, deep down, where I had gone. He didn't ask, and I didn't offer any explanations. Instead, I stood before him, my heart heavy with the decision I was about to make. "George," I said, my voice steady but firm. It's over. I can't live like this anymore. He opened his mouth to protest, to plead for another chance, but I held up my hand, silencing him. You broke us, George. You broke me. And I don't think there's any fixing this. His shoulders slumped, the weight of his choices finally crashing down on him. I turned away, walking back into the house to pack a small bag. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to leave. I had to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my peace. As I stood at the edge of the village, the path ahead of me winding into the unknown, I felt the weight of my decision settle in. I had chosen to leave behind the man I once loved, the life I had once cherished. But where would I go now? What would the future hold for me, a woman starting over, alone? I looked back one last time, at the village that had been my home, at the man who had once been my everything. And then, with a deep breath, I stepped forward, into the unknown. But as I walked away, a new question burned in my mind: could I ever truly be free of the past? Or would George's betrayal haunt me forever?